Good morning, everyone. This is Niranjan Sitapure, a third-year PhD student in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Texas A&M University. And today I'll be talking about multiscale modeling and control of quantum dot synthesis, and why is this a step towards continuous nanomanufacturing. Uh, so let's get right into it. Let me give some background and understand why this topic is important to the community. So firstly, what are cesium lead bromide quantum dots? So these are perovskite structure semiconducting nanocrystals, which typically range from the size of around 5 nanometers to 10 nanometers and show a phenomenon of quantum size confinement, which basically means that the color and the wavelength of emission of these nanocrystals depend upon their size. And that's why they find applications in wide areas such as LED technologies, display technologies, and solar cells. Also, these show a very high quantum efficiency and a very large luminosity, and that's why they have garnered a lot of attention. However, all these applications demand that the size of these crystals are accurate, and that sets the premise for the objective of the work, which is to control these nanocrystal sizes because they directly affect the properties of these quantum dots. Earlier, mostly in recent times, the work that has been done on this field is in the chemistry community and has been mostly restricted to batch or like flask based synthesis, which is problem when you try to scale it up because of batch to batch variation. Scale up has issues when you're trying to do a batch scale up. And the kinetics of this process is very fast, so 10 to 20 nanoseconds, which makes process control difficult once you do the batch process. On the other side, if you try to do a continuous format of the process, you can control the crystal size very effectively using or manipulating the flow rate, the precursor concentration, temperature, and so on. Also, because of the continuous nature, there won't be batch to batch variation, and you can have a large scale production. Me and our collaborators try to do this as a proof of concept by using a plug flow crystallizer, we'll call it PFC, from now onwards, wherein there is an inlet of the precursors at the start of the reactor or the crystallizer, and they form a colloidal solution and the crystals grow throughout the length of the PFC. You can measure the size of the crystals using photoluminescence using a spectrophotometer and get the size of these continents. What we found was actually is very peculiar that the flow velocity drastically affects the crystal size. So as you increase your flow rate, the crystal size becomes smaller and smaller. Also, this all happens at a room temperature and has a minimal heat of crystallization. Furthermore, we found that the reaction kinetics is very fast, to 10 to 20 nanoseconds. So this all sets it in a very unconventional crystallization form, where there have been not many well-established simulation models in the literature, and that's why we are going to focus on modeling and control of such a quantum dot process. Uh, to give us a short overview of what we are going to do is we are going to build a plug flow crystallizer, which has two inputs: the concentration of the precursors and the flow rate, and you can effectively control these or manipulate these two inputs to get the required crystal size for your application. So we begin by writing the mass and energy balance. Uh, we can write the concentration balance, which has a convection term and a consumption term. The consumption term depends on how much crystals are forming, so that's the decrease in the solute concentration. Now, in traditional crystallization, the growth rate of the crystals can be determined using some traditional empirical crystallization models. However, because quantum dot synthesis is a very new field, maybe relatively 5 years, there are no established growth models that can be used to simulate this process. So we needed to come up with a alternative model or a new way to model the growth rate of these quantum dot crystals. The way we do this is using kinetic Monte Carlo simulations, which, as you might know, are a stochastic kind of simulations which finds the time-dependent evolution of a certain phenomena, in this case, crystallization. Um, However, before we use KMC simulations, we need to break down the process of crystallization into various micro steps and then use KMC to simulate that. Uh, In the literature, there are two schools of thoughts. One is the bromine shell approach, and one is the ligand shell approach. And many of the papers say that these are the microscopic steps in crystallization. So, in the bromine shell approach, they say that the unit cells, or the small fundamental building units of the crystals, they aggregate. However, there is a formation of a bromine shell around it, which hinders the crystal growth um, and helps you control the size. On the other hand, the ligand shell approach says that the crystal is aggregating as the unit cells grow, but instead of bromine, the ligands, which are in the precursor solution itself, form form a shell around it on the crystal surface, as you can see from the yellow dots over here. And these ligands are not bound chemically, but more loosely bound and can dissolve back into the solution. And this desorption back is given by the binding energy of the ligands. So with these two competing models, we made the KMC simulations and tried to integrate it in a continuum model. So this was our mass balance equation. We can discretize in space and time, and at each spatio-temporal point, you need to know the growth rate of the crystals to solve this equation. And that comes from the KMC I described on the PV expedition. So you can run this in a loop from 0 to whatever your time of the process is, and from the start of the crystallizer to the end of the crystallizer, so as at the length of the plug flow crystallizer. And what you get is that you'll get the spatiotemporal evolution of concentration, the crystal size, and the growth rate. Using this, we tried to choose which of the approaches is better. So in the A approach, you can see that the bromine shell approach is actually not very good, and there is a large mismatch between the simulation result, which is given in the red curve, and the blue curve, which is the experimental method. So this does not describe the crystallization dynamics well. On the other hand, the ligand shell approach is actually a very good fit to the experimental data. So you can see that the solid lines are the simulation results, and the scatter plot is the blue, where the blue dots or red dots are, is the experimental result. And the deviation from experimental and simulation model is from 2 to 15%, which is very good in as if considering the error in the experiments. Also, these are for different varying flow rates because it's a continuous crystallizer. So we have tried to validate this model throughout the operation flow rates of the plug flow crystallizer. Uh, with this, you can plot a 3D curve of quantum dot size or crystal size uh, in space and time, in this case, throughout the length of the crystallizer and throughout the time. You can see that initially the crystal size is very small, and then it rapidly grows, and then it eventually saturates to a certain size, which is very similar to what you see it on the previous slide. Also, um, similarly, you can have the concentration profile throughout the plug flow crystallizer. So initially it starts at say 11 millimolars, and then it suddenly drops because the crystals are growing, and then it reaches a saturation value around 7 millimolar as the crystal sizes saturates at around 7 nanometers. Also, you will see that there is a certain roughness. This roughness comes from the fact that KMC simulations are stochastic in nature, and at every grid point, there is going to be certain difference in the KMC simulation, and which is quite useful, and I'll explain about it later. With this, we understand that we can use the concentration and the flow rate to control the crystal size. And so we formed an optimal operation problem where our objective is to minimize the variation of crystal size from the set point size, subject to some input constraints on flow rate and concentration. And these are obviously practical constraints. And what the optimization intends to find is the inlet flow rate velocity and the inlet concentration for a given set point. However, it's important to notice that in order to do that, the optimizer needs to find the solution and describe the crystallization in the plug flow crystallizer, which is defined by this equation here. And it has the growth rate term. And this growth rate term is actually found by the KMC simulations I described previously. So effectively, it will be very difficult for the optimizer to say do 100 100 iterations, and in each iteration solve the computationally expensive KMC simulation. This whole process would take around, almost an infinite amount of time. So we needed to come up with a surrogate model or a reduced order model to mimic this KMC simulation. And we started to use neural networks to mimic the KMC simulation because they are called as universal approximators. Um, and effectively what we did was we said that um, what we need is the growth rate of the crystal, which will be our output. And it depends on the concentration of the precursor concentration, it depends on the flow rate, and it depends on the crystal size. So these three things can be considered the input to our neural network. And we can use KMC simulation data, which is a high fidelity simulation, and which is validated to generate the input data at various concentrations, various flow rates, and various sizes, and try to form a neural network. Just to a brief overview, neural networks basically have certain inputs and certain weights and bias, which combine to form a certain linearly independent solution, and that goes through an activation function such as a sigmoid function, a ReLU function, which brings nonlinearity to the picture, and that's why you can have a nonlinear relation between the input and the output. In this case, we tried to choose the neural network structure, which is called as the architecture. So we tried to plot a validation error for each of the neural networks as a function of the number of neurons. We found that for the case of 20 neurons and the 90 neurons, the validation error was quite good, and we finally decided that the case with 20 neurons and 2 hidden layers gives the best result, or the best test error. The test error is basically a data set which the neural network has not seen, and actually is a good test of how generalizable your neural network is. In this graph, we plot the KMC result versus the neural network result, and it mimics very well. The one thing to notice is KMC took around 1 minute to do the simulation, and the neural network took around 2.5 milliseconds, which makes it around 24,000 times faster, and our optimizer is going to work way better. With this, we showed an example of set point tracking for the case of 9 nanometers. That's an intended crystal size or set point size. And we feed it this to the optimizer, and the optimizer says that our inlet concentration should be around 10 to 10.2 millimolars, and the flow rate or flow velocity should be around 0.07 centimeters per second. And with this, we expect that we reach the set point size. So the figure in the P shows the crystal size evolution in space and time, and it reaches a value of around 9.8 nanometers, which is 8% deviation from the set point. And given that this is an open loop simulation, the result is quite reasonable. Again, you see that there is a roughness in the nature, and this roughness is because of the stochastic nature of KMC and mimics the crystal to crystal heterogeneity. Basically, each crystal is obviously going to be slightly different, and this is reflective of the fact. Uh, Another thing is you can also have the concentration drop as it varies, as the crystallization varies, and you can see that initially the concentration is around 10 to 0.5, which was the inlet concentration, and then it suddenly drops to a value which is around 7 millimolars, because the crystal size now is saturated. Again, there is a roughness because of the stochastic nature of the KMC, and it represents the axial mixing in PFM. In conclusion, we used KMC simulations to describe uh, crystallization of cesium lead bromide quantum dots. We validated the results for a plug flow crystallizer, and it was good. We set up a neural network model to run the optimal operation faster. We showed a case study for a set point case, and show that set point tracking is actually possible. Also, because this sets the platform for advanced process control techniques where you can use an MPC or a PID to do a feedback control. Also, you can extend this to slug flow crystallizers, which we are doing now. And overall, this is a platform and can be considered as a leap in the smart on-demand nano-manufacturing for quantum dots. With this, I would like to end the presentation. Say thank you. and I would be happy if you have, to answer any of the questions you have.